Welcome back, members. Can I request Pramod R. Hegde, our Vice Chairman for the branch, to escort C. Hanish sir onto dais and welcome him with floral bouquet. Thank you, sir. I am privileged to introduce speaker for the second session of the day, C.A. Hanish. Yes, we'll be dwelling upon the subject treatment and reporting. Hanish has more than 10 years of proven work experience in the field of indirect taxes and GST. He works closely with clients engaged in complex businesses like pharma and real estate. Hanish has, to his credit, a speaker on various impactful platforms across India like the ICI, ICSI, ICMAI, FKCCI, BCIC and CTC. He heads the litigation practice and has represented clients at various judicial forums including CESTAT, Advance Ruling, etc. He has a keen interest in new age businesses and is helping startups, EV leasing companies, gaming companies, crypto companies in various GST related matters. With this brief introduction, I present before you C.A. Hanish. Yes, sir. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Still good morning only, right? Okay. All right. So, after a long time, we are having a session at the institute. At least I am participating, and frankly, I am a little nervous because I'm just got too comfortable with webinar, right? Where if we don't know the question to any of the answers, oh, internet is not proper. I'm not able to hear. Here in physical, the issue is we cannot say anything. We have to say that, yeah, I phased out and I don't know the answer. Correct, no? So, okay, no problem. We'll try our best. So, very interesting topic. But before that, thanks to Bangalore branch for arranging such a beautiful session, packed house. So, thank you very much to the entire team of the Bangalore branch for envisaging this program and organizing this program. And thanks to all of you for coming in large numbers. Right. So the topic given to me is the slides visible? Yeah. Okay. The topic given to me is more on GSTR 9 relating to outward supplies. So we'll focus on the outward supplies as far as reporting in GSTR 9 is concerned. It may not take a lot of time to cover all of these. So somewhere here and there will be some digression. So please bear with me on those aspects. Okay. Now all of us have already gone through 17-18 audit, 18-19 department audit. Right? The first note will be 1 not matching with 3B. Second will be 1 not matching with 9. Third, 9 not matching with 9C. And fourth, if you have multiple state registrations or multiple registrations in the same state, 9C not matching with financials. Correct, no? 4 standard audit observations are there in all the audit inquiries. Correct? Of course, it should not match, no? If it matches, then there is a problem. If financials matches with 9C, sorry, 9 actually, 9C, the starting point itself is financials, but if it matches, then there is something wrong. It is like in cases where there is fraudulent ITC, e-way bill will be there, delivery challan will be there, vehicle number will be there, bank payment receipt also will be there, invoice also will be there, only goods will not be there. Correct? But in a genuine transaction, goods will be there, everything else is missing. Correct, no? So likewise here also, 9 and the financials are not required to be matched. I think that is the point we have to tell everybody, that 9 will not, should not and cannot match with financials, because the basis of preparation of GSTR 9 is completely different from the basis on which the financials are being prepared. Correct? Because financial, I would request if you can keep all your phones on silent mode. Okay, but today no match also. Why are we even looking at the phone? Tomorrow we'll look at the match, right? Okay. So if you look at the financials, and I don't know much about accounts, right? So if you look at the financials, these are based on the accounting treatment which we give to the transactions. But when we come to GST, the turnover is reported based on whether the underlying transaction qualifies to be a supply or it does not qualify to be a supply. right? So fundamentally, the transaction itself is completely different. Let's take a simple example, okay? Right? In case of, say, I am selling some goods on approval basis, right? I may give him time up to 9 months or 12 months and say, whenever you sell the goods, you let me know, I will raise an invoice on you, because I'm a new company, I want to push my stock in the market. So you take 12 months also, but whenever you are able to sell to your customer, you give me a confirmation, I will make the sale to you, right? But what does the GST law say? The GST law says that you send the goods on approval basis. If you don't get back the goods within 6 months time, or you don't get confirmation from your prospective customer within 6 months time, as far as GST is concerned, it is already a sale, right? So fundamentally, in GST, it is already recorded as a sale. But whereas when it comes to your financials, it is not a sale. It is inventory lying in third party warehouse, correct? No? So 9 and 9C should not match. Sorry, 9 and financials should not match, right? Okay. So let's see how can we reconcile, how can we present the GSTR 9 reconciliations with financials in a better way, all right? So this is what we discussed. Financials are prepared based on accounting standards, Ind AS, etc. But GSTR 9 requires reporting of any transaction which I believe is a supply. If I believe it is not a supply, I will not report that, because I am self-assessing my taxes, okay? Now, if you look at the format of 9C, that's a very nice format actually. I believe that 9C format is very good, because, you know, even the revenue authorities had a problem in VAT, as far as VAT is concerned. What would happen is, every assessee would give the reconciliation in his own format. It would become very difficult for anybody to understand each and every format taxpayer wise. So they've given a standard format and said, start with your financials, add something, subtract something, end of it, whatever is your audit work paper should be equal to whatever qualifies to be a turnover as per GSTR 9. Then you give me a rate wise bifurcation and show whether tax is paid by you to that extent or not. Right? That's what essentially GSTR 9C is all about. So you start with the revenue as per financials, and that will be the exact number which gets carried to 9C. Unless you have state wise or multiple registrations in the same state, then you will have to have a, though the audit officers are insisting on state-wise trial balance, but if you look at the GST law, there is no requirement of preparing a state-wise trial balance. In fact, even in GSTR 9C, okay, table 5, it says where you have multiple locations, data has to be extracted from whatever relevant documents are available with you. It does not say you should have a state-wise trial balance which should be either certified by the chartered accountant or it should be self-attested. No, it is not required at all. Okay, for ease of the authorities, they are asking for that state-wise trial balance, otherwise legally there is no requirement. Okay, so the starting point is the financial as per revenue. We'll take a very simple company which has got only one single registration and they have got, say, a 10 crore turnover in their books of accounts. I start with that. Now I start adding all those transactions which are not revenue as per financials but qualify to be supply as per GST. Right? So I add all of those transactions. Then I remove all those transactions which are revenue as per financials but are not supply as per GST. We'll look at both the examples on both the sides, which have to be added, which have to be subtracted. When I add and subtract these two from the starting point, which is my turnover as per financials, what I should ideally get is the revenue which has to be reported in my GSTR 9. If that is matching with the amount which I have reported in GSTR 9, then at least there is a reasonable surety that the GSTR 9 prepared by me seems to be okay. Meaning I might have qualified something as not liable to GST at all. That's a totally separate discussion. But the point is, at least number wise, when a disclosure has taken place, you have reported everything what was required to be reported. Alright. So now let's look at what are those transactions which qualify to be supply as far as GST is concerned, but a separate treatment may be given as far as accounting is concerned. Okay. One is unbilled revenue. Like I said, accounts last I read when I was preparing for my CA final. After that, I have no idea about accounts. So if you have any doubts on this, you will have to ask your neighbor. Don't take risk with me, right? Okay, because these concepts I know as bad as or maybe as I am not competent to even discuss these topics. But unbilled revenue as a concept, okay, what my teachers told me long time back is there has to be a matching concept. So whichever financials you have recorded your expenditure, the same financial year you have to also record your revenue. Now you were not able to record the revenue because you have not completed a portion of the work. So in the books, just to recognize the revenue, you will show it as an unbilled revenue, or you have not satisfied certain conditions of the contract. So it is revenue, but it is unbilled, and you will recognize that revenue subsequently, right? From a GST angle, now supply is determined based on what is there in your contract. Your contract says once the first slab is complete, you are required to raise a demand order on your customer, or you are allowed to collect the money from the customer, okay? But in your, as far as accounting is concerned, the revenue recognition principles can be completely different, right? So you might have an unbilled revenue in your books which you have recognized, but you have not completed the first slab, okay? In GST it may not be a turnover for you, but in accounts it may be a turnover for you, or vice versa. In accounts you have recognized revenue only to the extent of first slab, but you have completed work till the third slab. So as far as GST is concerned, you are required to raise demand orders or request the customers to make the payment up to third slab. But in the accounts, your revenue recognized only to the extent of first slab. So because of that, there can be a disconnect between the turnover reported in the GST returns versus the revenue recognized in your financials. That is one. Now if you look at 9C closely, it says add opening balance of unbilled revenue and reduce the closing balance of the unbilled revenue, because the assumption here is whatever was the opening balance last year, definitely you would have finished the work. So that much amount of revenue you please add, but to the extent of unbilled revenue at the end of the year, you would not have billed. So you please remove that much amount of from your financials. Okay. Unadjusted advances. Again, this is relevant only from a service angle, not from goods angle, because in case of services, in GST, the tax has to be offered on the day when you receive the advances or the day when the services are completed, whichever is earlier, meaning you have that invoice to be raised within 30 days time or not. I am not getting into too much of detail around it, but ideally, in case of GST, the day when you raise the invoice or the day when you receive the money, whichever is earlier, you are required to offer that money to tax. But as far as GST is concerned, financials are concerned, let's take an example of a hotel, okay? So in a hotel, we are in November, so we are assuming we are talking about 22-23, okay? In the month of November, there is a wedding for which the hall is required to be booked. That booking will take place in February of 2023, right? So money has been received by the hotel on February 2023, but the event is going to take place in November 2023, correct? Right? So in the books of the hotel, the revenue will be recognized in November 2023 because the obligation has got completed or the services is completed in November 2023. But as far as GST is concerned, the supply has taken, the time of supply is the date when advance is received. So advance is in February. That's why there will be a mismatch between what is there in GST versus what is there in financials to the extent of this timing difference of advances. So this unadjusted advances will be liable to GST, but will not be revenue as far as financials are concerned. Third, deemed supply under Schedule 1. Okay, so all of us are already worried about this deemed supply, corporate guarantee, director guarantee, personal guarantee, correct? Circular has also been issued where it said director guarantees are not liable to tax, but corporate guarantee are liable to tax, and they have amended the law itself. Rule 28 has been amended to say, notwithstanding whatever I have told in Rule 28, as far as corporate guarantee is concerned, the value of the guarantee multiplied by 1% or the actual value charged will be the value on which GST is required to be discharged. Now we have more doubts after this provision has been introduced, whether first it is a supply at all or not. Second, if it is a supply, then the valuation mechanism, will it apply retrospectively or prospectively? Will the tax have to be paid annually or it has to be paid one time only? These are some more questions which are going to come up as far as corporate guarantee is concerned. But let's restrict ourselves to Schedule 1. Now what does Schedule 1 say? Schedule 1 says that if the underlying transaction qualifies to be a supply, but there is no consideration, and so far as those transactions are concerned, it will still qualify to be a taxable transaction provided you have satisfied all the conditions mentioned in Schedule 1. Let's take an example. Okay, I have a laptop. Okay, I have this laptop. I have purchased this laptop. I have taken input tax credit of the same. Alright, I used it for 2 months. I did not like it, so I gave it to another employee of mine. Okay, it has not been given to the employee as a gift. It has been given to the employee that you use it. okay, and he is using it. There is no tax impact, right? But if this is a 1 lakh worth laptop which I have purchased and I give it to an employee as part of Diwali gift, the value of that gift is more than 50,000 rupees, it becomes a deemed supply under Schedule 1. Okay, so any transactions with the employees or any gift to the employees more than 50,000 rupees will be liable to GST. Please ensure that you check this in this month when you are preparing this month's return for your clients. All Diwali gift, Diwali parties more than 50,000 rupees could be liable to GST. Okay, and all these Diwali parties, reversal of input tax credit may also get triggered. Right, so very careful, please observe, please focus on those transactions when you are preparing the returns for this month. Right, okay. Next, I have this laptop, okay, I have used it for 1 or 2 years and I have donated this laptop. Is there a GST liability on this? No? Yes? Schedule 1 says permanent transfer or disposal of business asset on which input tax credit has been claimed. So when I bought this laptop, I have taken input credit on that. I am donating this laptop, so permanent transfer or disposal of a business asset, I am required to pay output tax on the same, right? So any deletion in your business asset on which credit has been claimed could trigger GST liability. But what happens in accounts? Is it a revenue? No, so in financials it will be only a deletion from fixed asset register. But as far as GST is concerned, it will be treated as a supply. Again, a mismatch between what is reported in financials versus what is being reported in GST returns, right? Related party transactions, any transaction with related party, as long as it can satisfy the test of supply, right? As long as it can satisfy the test of supply, what Schedule 1 says is consideration is not relevant. Now I have seen a lot of, I'm sure Annapurna also would have covered this when she's talking about handling notices. I'm sure all of us have come across cases where in notes to accounts the officer sees related party transaction, whatever is the closing balance multiplied by 18%, pay tax. Have you come across those transactions? Because they believe that it is a Schedule 1 transaction between related parties is deemed to be a supply. Let's go back to Schedule 1. What does Schedule 1 says? If there is no consideration, it is taxable. If there is a value assigned to it and it's appearing in notes to account, that means there is consideration already. So that means it is not forming part of Schedule 1 at least. It may be supply, it may not be supply, is something totally different, but it is not forming part of Schedule 1. Okay, so just because I am transacting with related parties does not mean it is taxable. Okay, but again, if I am doing a stock transfer, okay, from Bangalore branch to Chennai branch, I am doing a stock transfer. As far as GST is concerned, it is liable to GST. So I will be reporting a transaction as purchase in Chennai, but sale in Bangalore. But when I prepare my financials, it is only a single transaction of originally when I have purchased from my vendor. The interest branch transactions will all get eliminated. Again, that will lead to a mismatch between GSTR 9 and financials. Okay. Credit notes issued beyond the due date. So if the credit notes relates to 22-23, what is the last date for issuing credit note? This discussion never ends. Just 2 days back, a client called and said, what is the last date for issuing credit note for 22-23? What is the last date? I couldn't hear at all. Some issue with my ear. What is the last date? 31st October or 30th November? It has to be issued by 31st of October. It should be reported by 30th November. That means your October return, government is saying you can delay by 10 days, but please report it by 30th of November. And that is what I believe is the correct answer. It has to be issued. For us to report by 20th of November, I will have to issue it by 31st of October. So last date for issuance of credit note is already gone. Correct? Right? You have to only now, you are now only required to report the transaction in your GST returns. Right? Now what if your terms require you to issue the credit note in December? Your terms with your customer requires you to issue credit note in December. You will issue a financial credit note, but as far as financials are concerned, you will give impact of that credit note. Correct? It will reduce your revenue. As far as GST is concerned, it will not reduce your revenue. You will pay tax on that in GST, but you will reduce your revenue as far as financials are concerned. Again, a mismatch between both the statements. Right? Okay. Then trade discounts which are not permitted in the GST law. Now, if you look at the discounts, there are conditions attached. If you look at section 15, there are certain conditions based on which discounts can be allowed. Okay. You have to communicate the discount to your customer before the supply takes place. If you have not communicated and you give some special discount, 1% extra discount because of Diwali, you can issue a financial credit note for that. But as far as GST is concerned, on the entire value, you will have to discharge GST. Right? Then credit notes which are not permitted at all. Okay? You are not allowed to issue credit note in certain transactions. Again, it will lead to differences between both the statements. Adjustments under section 15. Now, section 15 says value of supply is the transaction value. Okay, that means if I purchase this laptop for ₹1,00,000 and I have given the shopkeeper ₹1,00,000, that is the value of supply. The shopkeeper is required to pay GST on the same. Okay, but if he is related to me and he is giving this laptop to everybody at 1,50,000 and giving it to me at ₹1,00,000, for the purpose of GST, the shopkeeper will have to report the transaction at ₹1,50,000 and discharge GST on ₹1,50,000. But as far as books are concerned, I have raised invoice of 1 lakh, I have realized 1 lakh only. So this upliftment of turnover has happened because of a specific valuation provision in GST law. Because of that, my turnover in GST is increased, but my financial turnover is not increased. Right? So here again, there will be a mismatch between the financials and the GST returns. Reimbursement of expenses, right? For the purpose of GST, unless you are a pure agent, okay, all the expenses incurred incidental to the main supply will become liable to GST, correct? But as far as books of accounts are concerned, what do? We will incur the expenditure and recovery of that expenditure will be credited to that account itself. So my expense account will be zero, correct? No? Let's take an example, okay? I am paying electricity bill on behalf of, and I'll come to electricity also, and beautiful circular has come very recently, right? So, electricity bill I have paid on behalf of Mr. X, or we'll take a very simple example of MCA, okay? A person came to me, said, please incorporate a company for me, whatever charges are there, I will bear those charges, okay? So, I pay some filing fee, say assuming some ₹1,000 filing fee was there, which was required to be paid to MCA. I said, my charges, ₹10,000 for incorporation of the company plus ₹1,000 challan from MCA, right? I will raise an invoice of ₹11,000. What does GST now say? Unless you are a pure agent, you are required to pay tax. Here I would say I am a pure agent because the challan has come in your name. You authorized me to incorporate the company. On your behalf I have incorporated the company. I have paid the money to MCA. So on the ₹1,000 I am not required to discharge tax. But because there was some issue with name, for name approval, I had to go to Kendriya Sadan. So I incurred ₹100 as transportation charges. So I added that ₹100 also as reimbursement of expenses. Now here, I am not a pure agent of the client, right? So I will have to pay tax on ₹10,000 plus ₹100. ₹1,000 gets removed because I acted as a pure agent, but ₹10,000 which is my fees and ₹100 which is my expenses which I have incurred, on both of it I am required to pay GST, right? So in GST, my turnover is going to be ₹10,100. But as far as financials are concerned, how will I record it? I will record revenue ₹10,000. I will record MCA filing fee ₹1,000 because I have paid. Then when I recover that from the customer, I will credit to the same expense account. So MCA filing fee will be 0. Correct? Travel expenses 100. The moment I recover that from my customer, travel expenses account will be credited. The final amount in my travel expenses will be 0. So my revenue is going to be 10,000 as far as financials are concerned, but as far as GST is concerned, it will be ₹10,100, right? So again, a mismatch because of reimbursement of expenses issue. Now, let's come to this electricity issue. Like I said, I'll be digressing a little, okay? Now, I am a landlord. Hopefully one day I will be landlord in a city like Bangalore, okay? Maybe Sadashiv Nagar or Jayanagar is the area which I am looking at, right? So I am a landlord. I have a, when we think 10-floored building sufficient, no? Okay, 10-floored building, view Lal Bagh, yeah, then and one side metro, one side Lal Bagh, and that's all sufficient, right? So a 10-floored building, one side Lal Bagh, one side metro. I have given it on rent to 10 different offices. Okay, electricity bill also is very, very huge. So rent is monthly 5 lakh rupees per floor. Sufficient, no? For my retirement, I require, okay, for sufficient, right? So 5 lakh rupees the rent per floor. Okay, and electricity charges is 1 lakh rupees. In the agreement, I have clearly said, I am going to charge you rental 5 lakh rupees. Electricity bill I am going to collect from you on consumption basis. Whatever BESCOM charges, I have a separate meter for you. Whatever BESCOM charges, you will have to pay it to me, right? So totally I am recovering 6 lakh rupees from my tenant. Now you tell me, GST is required to be paid by me or charged by me when I raise the invoice on 5 lakh rupees or 6 lakh rupees? 6? 5? 5? Okay. Now because it's such a big office and they are doing some very interesting work that lights cannot be switched off even for a minute, right? So I am assuring them 24/7 power backup also. So whenever the power goes, there will be no waiting time also. Automatically it will switch to DG, right? And for the DG also, I will keep filling in petrol. Whatever is the charges I have borne for generation of power, I will collect that at say cost to cost, no profit. I'd say 8 rupees per unit or 10 rupees per unit. Okay, that is the cost of generation of electricity maybe whenever there is power cut. So I am recovering on actual consumption basis. I will read the meter, the DG meter is separate. If you have consumed 100 units, 100 units into 10 rupees, I will raise the invoice. On this DG charges, is GST applicable or not applicable? Applicable? So DG charges, everybody agrees it is applicable. Electricity charges, mixed view. It may be, it may not be, depends on the contract. Contract we are only wording. You tell me what should be the clause which should be added to say GST not applicable on electricity charges. On actual basis, then exempt. Okay, no need to pay GST at all. Okay. When you collected 100 rupees from your customer for going to Kendriya Sadan, was it actual basis? I will give Ola invoice. Correct, no? Actual. Excellent point. You are acting as a agent. Correct, no? In whose name electricity meter is? My name. How can I act as an agent? I am principal. Correct, no? Who is an agent? If I appoint somebody and say, you have to act like me, he is agent. Correct, no? If you have to interact with third parties, then you will have to do what I am supposed to do. He becomes an agent. I in my own role cannot be agent. Correct, no? Tomorrow he does not pay the bill. Who will run around with BESCOM to get the electricity restored? Penalty will be on delay charges. That's all. That means I am only for my convenience transfer. See, I can enter into rental agreement in two ways. 5 lakh rupees plus electricity, 7 lakh rupees, whatever is the bill, I will take care. Correct? No. The mechanism in which you charge cannot decide what the treatment should be given to the underlying supply. Luckily we have a circular which says the owner is deemed to be an agent. Circular also is saying that only. The owner is deemed to be an agent, so no need to pay tax. We will happily accept those circulars, correct, and say I am not required to pay the tax. But I have another issue here, okay. I have a big, after I build a 10-floored building, now I have good amount of money. I have constructed one IT park, big IT park where there are 50 buildings. Okay. Now I cannot maintain all those 50 buildings. So what I did, I have a company where I will earn rent. I have now a maintenance company who takes care of all the electricity, everything. Right? Okay. Now there is rent bearing company, there is maintenance bearing company. All the electricity bill will be charged on actuals by the maintenance company on the tenant, and then on my behalf will be paid to BESCOM. In this case, now you tell me, I am raising only an invoice of 5 lakh rupees on my tenant. The maintenance company says 5 rupees I will charge for maintenance, I will clean the glass, if there is anything broken, the tiles are broken, I will replace all of that, plus whatever is your electricity bill, I will pay that. I will charge it to you on actual basis, and I will pay it to BESCOM. In this case, there are maintenance companies involved. Is GST applicable on electricity charges or not? Yes? No? Here at least I would think there is an agent involved. Here there is a third party involved. But if you look at that circular very carefully, maintenance company word only is not used in that second para where they say if it is on actuals, no need to pay GST. So again that will be an issue. Right? Now we can always take a stand that no, maintenance companies, actuals, he is acting as an agent, all those. But if you look at that circular, that second para, the first para talks about maintenance companies also, where rentals and maintenance are collected. Right? But the second para talks about only owner, developer, residential welfare association. It does not talk about the fourth person. Etc. is there. Okay, but that etc. how do we use? How do we read when we are reading owners and developers? That means we are talking about owners only, we are not talking about an outsourced entity. So that is the issue I have with that circular. Right? Okay. Deemed valuation. Now there are a lot of cases where there is deemed valuation which is given under section 15 itself. Classic case, gaming companies. Okay. In case of gaming companies, they are discharging tax on 15%, which they believed as their platform fee, 10 to 15%. So what happens generally is, if say suppose I want to enter into a game, tomorrow is the match, so I know who is going to win and I want to create a team of myself, cricketers. What I will do is, I will pay some money, okay, buy a team, okay. A percentage of that is kept as a platform fee. Okay, so assuming I put in 100 rupees, somebody else puts in 100, the third person puts in 100, the fourth person puts in 100. So the total pool is now 400 rupees. From each of the persons, 10 to 15% is collected by the gaming companies because they are facilitating this game. Okay, so 40 rupees goes to the gaming company, 360 rupees is now left in the prize pool. Whoever wins gets 360 rupees. So now look at it from the perspective of a player. He has invested 100 rupees with a chance of getting 360 rupees back. Good gamble, no? If I can invest 100 and I have an opportunity to get 360 rupees, I would definitely want to get involved in these activities. Okay. Now, the gaming companies were discharging tax on this 10 rupees multiplied by the number of players into 18%, saying, we are only providing platform to everybody. You guys can come play. For providing the platform, my fee will be 10%. Okay. Now, what has happened? They said, no, the tax is applicable on the value of the bet. You might want to collect 10 rupees, but what is the value of the bet? I want to charge GST on the value of the bet. The value of the bet now is 400 rupees. 100, 200, 300, 400. 400 into 28%. Okay, for convenience sake, take it as 30 rupees only. Okay, 30%. So it becomes 120 rupees. So if somebody bets 400, 120 goes to the government. Okay, 40 rupees goes to the platform, because platform says whether government takes 28 or 10, I will have to make money. No, I have to take Virat Kohli as the brand ambassador. Who will pay him? Correct. So 160 gone. Right. Now what is left now? 240. Right. In the money pool, 240 is left. Now look at this. I will have to pay 100 in a game of chance or a game of skill. I have no idea. Right. Where I will get back only 240 rupees. For the risk of 100 rupees, the reward is only 240 rupees. Okay. Let's not get into correctness or non-correctness of this, or politics behind it, or ethics issue behind it. The point as far as GST is concerned is the revenue for the platform is 40 rupees, but they will end up paying tax on 120 rupees because of deemed valuation. Right? Sorry, the value for them is 40 rupees, but they will pay tax on 400 rupees. Right? So in GST returns, the reporting will be 400, but in the financials, the reporting will be 40 rupees. So that is where the deemed valuation comes into picture. All these points you will already find in your GSTR 9C. In your GSTR 9C, all these are already there. Right? So you have to only classify the amounts into how much is deemed supply, how much is unadjusted advances, how much is unbilled revenue. You have to classify. Now let's come to certain transactions. I'll come to forex fluctuation. That's very easy. Let's come to certain transactions which are not there in your GSTR 9C format, but which can also lead to a mismatch. Okay. So there are dividends. I've invested in some shares. I've got dividends. Right. Now those will also create a mismatch between GST returns and GSTR, and the financials. We'll quickly go through this. Share in profit. If I'm a company who has invested as a partner in the partnership firm, okay. Sale of assets. In case of books of accounts, I will report only the profit or the loss. Correct? I purchased the asset at 1 lakh. The written down value today is 20,000 rupees. I was able to sell it at 25,000 rupees. There will be a deletion in my fixed asset register to the extra of 20,000. I was able to sell at 25,000. I will report in my books only 5,000 as profit on sale of asset. Correct? But as far as GST is concerned, I will have to report the entire transaction, which is 25,000 rupees. Correct? Unless that valuation mechanism comes into picture, which says charge a depreciation of 5% per quarter. Let's ignore that for the time being. Only point I am trying to make is, in financials I will report profit or loss, but in GST I will report the entire transaction value. Right? Okay. Investments. If I have sold some investments, okay, the definition of goods and services itself excludes security. So I am not required to pay tax when I sell the Reliance shares. So I am not going to report that in my GST returns at all. But in my financials, this becomes a revenue for me. Profit on sale of mutual funds, profit on redemption of mutual funds, or profit on sale of investments, right? Only for the purpose of implementation of Rule 42 and Rule 43, 1% of the sale value of the investment is deemed to be treated as an exempt turnover. But that does not mean sale of investment as exempt turnover, that I have to report that in my GSTR 9 as exempt turnover. It will be a non-GST supply only. Right? Only for the purpose of Rule 42 it is deemed to be a exempt turnover. Right? Then we have sale of land, where the effective rate of tax is 7.5%. Sorry, the notified rate of tax is 7.5%. The effective rate of tax is 5% because I get a deduction of 1/3. Right? So now, if you look at the format, now how do I report this transaction? Should I report my turnover as 100 rupees and then discharge tax at the rate of 5%, okay, or I should report the transaction at 66 rupees, right? That is a constant issue. If you come to 9C, there is no rate called 7.5%, correct? So you will be forced to report the turnover at 5%, and 1/3 will either be shown as exempt turnover or non-GST supply. I would believe non-GST supply is a better mechanism to disclose this turnover. Okay. Recovery is recorded under expenses, right? So if you have made some recoveries from our contractor, okay, so we are constructing something and the contractor was supposed to buy cement. He did not have cement, so from the site my own material he has taken. So what I will do, I will recover that amount from him. Okay, I will debit him for that 1 lakh rupees or 2 lakh rupees. That's actually not a supply, that's just a recovery. It is sitting in expenditure. So my total expenditure was 1 crore. I have reduced 1 lakh as expenditure because I have recovered that money from my contractor. From GST perspective, that's a supply made by me to the contractor. So I will pay GST on that. I will disclose this as GST revenue, but for my financials, it is sitting on the credit side of my expense account. Right? Reimbursement of expenses we discussed. Outward supply liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. For my financials, it is a revenue. But for my 1 and 3B, right, I will report it as turnover on which the other person is required to pay tax. There will be no tax element there, right? Okay. I'm sorry, there is a repetition of investments. I'm not sold twice, I sold it only once. I'm sorry why there is a repetition. Then there are transactions, very bad joke, horrible. Lunch break, madam. Right, okay. Right, okay. Next, not a supply. Like we have schedule 1, there is schedule 2, then there is schedule 3. Okay. The role of schedule 3 is to identify those transactions on which I am not required to pay tax at all. Okay. The heading itself says activity which does not amount to sale of goods or supply of services. So those are not supply of goods, not supply of services. Even if you engage in those, you are not required to pay GST on the same. But from my accounting angle, it will be treated as my revenue. Let's take an example. High C sale. What do you mean by a high C sale? Okay. I have a vendor in Africa. I have a customer, say, in Australia. Okay, a easy version of high C sale, let's take. Okay, I get the goods from Africa, send it directly to my customer who is in Australia. The goods do not even touch the Indian territorial waters. Okay, schedule 3 has 3-4 categories of sales. One is where goods do not enter into India, second high sea sale, third warehoused goods. Okay, there it is not treated as a supply. So from a GST angle, it is not a revenue at all. But from my financials, I purchased at 1 lakh, sold at 5 lakh rupees. It is definitely a sale for me and a purchase for me. Correct? So there will be a mismatch because I have not reported Schedule 3 transactions in my GST returns, or I am not required to pay tax on the transactions listed under Schedule 3. Right? Sorry. Construction services, from VAT era there is an issue. Correct? No? I am going to record the revenue in my books on percentage completion method, which no revenue authority will understand, and even if they want to understand, we will not be able to explain. Correct, no? Sir, statutory order ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಸರ್ ನಮಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. But AS7, AS9, so the reference haki, done. Correct, no? So they will give some reference of AS7, AS9 and say some construction receipt is there. But sir, on the demand notes, please look at my advances from customer. I have paid tax on everything. So in GST I am paying tax on advances from customer, which is in balance sheet. But in my financials I am reporting the revenue as per the accounting standard. So there is definitely of course there is going to be a mismatch between the two. Right? Deemed supplies, Schedule 1 we had discussed, that also will lead to a mismatch. So the one on the right, on my right hand side are already there in the format. If you look at GSTR 9C. The one on the left hand side, majority of the transactions are not there line item wise. You will have to report all of those in 5O. So another point in audit observation, breakup of 5O not given, tax not charged. So 5O multiplied by 18%, you are required to pay the tax. Correct, no? Another observation in audit observations. Right. This merger and demerger, very interesting. Okay. So on 1st April 2023, assuming we are talking about the current year, a company wants to demerge its business. So it started all the paperwork and the approval was received on 30th October 2024. Assuming after the paperwork took 1.5 years, almost more than 1.5 years. Okay. But the scheme of demerger was that it will be effective from 1st April 2023. Correct? So now what happens? In my financials, assuming the demerged the entity which is getting created after the demerger gets 70% of the revenue. Okay, as far as financials are concerned, the first company whose turnover was 100 crores, their financials will show only 30 crores revenue because we'll prepare the financials retrospectively, and the new entity will have 70 crores revenue for financial year 23-24. Correct? Is my understanding of accounts correct? But as far as GST is concerned, in the first entity, entire 100 crores will be booked. Right? So now look at your 9C. 100 crores revenue you start with, but you end up paying tax only on, you start with 30 crores revenue, but you pay tax on 70 crores. Right? But the other entity start with 70, end up with 0, because you are not going to pay tax in any tax in demerged entity because already the parent company or the, I don't know what it is called, parent company only, right, has already paid the tax. Right? So that is also another issue when we are reconciling the 9 and the financials. Clear? Okay. With this we are done with the boring part. I know so much of pin drop silence was there. Okay. Let's look at some practical aspects now of how to report the transactions. Right? Now we are preparing the GSTR 9 and 9C for financial year 22-23. Correct? The 31st December due date is for 22-23. 100% we will have transactions of 21-22 reported in 22-23, 22-23 reported in 22-23. Maximum transaction should be that only. And 22-23 reported in 23-24. Correct? Now all three types of transactions will be there. Now how do we report that? There is, meaning this is not a rule, but this is what I have been following, so I thought I should share this with you. Okay, let's look at the structure of GSTR 9. Okay, GSTR 9 has two parts. Current year turnover reported or required to be reported in the current year, and then you have table 10 and 11. I am talking about only outward supply, where current year transaction reported in the next year. Okay, let's take example for each and everything. Let's take example of 21-22 revenue. Okay, it's a revenue of 21-22 only. You raised a backdated invoice, sent it to the customer also, collected money also. Forgot reporting that in the GST returns. So what did you do? You reported in April 23. That is, so we are talking about 21-22, right? So you reported in April 22. You have reported in next year's financials, correct? So when you would have prepared the GSTR 9 of the last year, that is 21-22, you should have reported this transaction as turnover of 21-22, tax paid in 22-23. In table 10 you should have reported. Is this clear? Right? Okay. Then we have 22, so that is 21-22 transaction reported in 22-23. Now let's look at second transaction. 22-23 transaction reported in 22-23. This should not have any surprise element. Current year transaction reported in current year itself. It will all come under table 4, table 5. No other adjustment is required at all. Clear? Okay. Next. 22-23 transaction, that is current year transaction, tax paid in the next year, in 23-24. What do we do? Again go to table 10 and say current year transaction I have reported in 3B of the next year. Is this clear? Okay. Next, this is where some doubts could arise. Okay. 22-23 transaction not reported at all. When you did a 99C reconciliation, you realize that you have not paid tax on certain invoices. What do we do with that? Multiple ways. There is no right or wrong approach. Okay. But what I have been following personally is, I report that in table 4 and 5 itself. Okay, table 4 and 5 itself. Now when we report this in table 4 and 5, but I have not paid tax on this, what will happen? Now go to table 9. Table 9 picks up all the amounts on which taxes have been paid from electronic cash ledger, from electronic credit ledger. It will reflect only those transactions on which I have already paid tax in 22-23. I have added some additional line items in my table 4 and 5 for which tax has not been paid. So there will be a mismatch between tax payable in table 9 versus tax paid as per 3B, which is getting auto-populated in table 9. The difference I will have to attach as an annexure and say these are the differences, these are the transactions which were not reported earlier. I am paying this by way of DRC 03. This is the reference of DRC 03 that I have been following. What you can do is you can transfer that credit to 9C. See, that is your revenue, it is there in your books. You have not paid the tax. In your 9C you will get a difference, reconciliation difference, that you have not paid tax on this much turnover. Pay the taxes there by showing a reconciliation there. There is no right or wrong approach, but I found it comfortable to report that in my table 4 and 5. So that's what I have been following. But if you are following, or if you want to follow reporting that in 9C, there is nothing wrong about that approach as well. Right? Okay. Same thing, exactly the same thing holds good for debit notes and credit notes, except one thing, be careful when we are talking about credit notes, be careful about the due dates of credit notes. Certain transactions of 21-22 not reported in 21-22, reported in 22-23. If it is reported after 30th of November, it gets time barred, so don't report those credit notes at all. You should not report those credit notes because you should not claim deduction on those credit notes. Clear? Okay, that is the approach which you could follow as far as reporting of outward supplies is concerned. Right? We'll move ahead. Okay. This is the most funniest table actually till now in GSTR 9. Till now it is optional. Okay. The moment it becomes mandatory, I don't know how we will have to fill it, because there are so many questions around it actually. One is, all the refunds are being filed on the portal only, correct? What refund is processed, what refund is not processed, all the details are already available on the portal. Then why is the taxpayer been asked to collate all these details again and report it under 4 columns actually? Total refund claimed, total refund sanctioned, total refund rejected, total refund pending. All the 4 details portal already has the data, correct? Which can be, maybe some codes are missing, you incorporate those codes and the numbers can get pulled out. Okay. Now the interesting point here is, how do I report? Say assuming I filed my application in the month of March 2023 and I am preparing GSTR 9 for a financial year. Correct? No, not for a refund claim. I filed a refund application in March 2023 worth 1 crore. What will I do? I will write total refund claimed 1 crore. Right? Now it is sanctioned in April 2023. It is sanctioned in April 2023. Now, should I report that sanctioned in current year GSTR 9 or next year's GSTR 9? Current years? Okay, so you filed March 2023 application in January 2024. Current year refund application relates to March 2023. You filed in Jan 2024. There what will you do? Because you have filed in 23-24, you will say I will report in 23-24. Excellent, correct. But then what is the information department will get by reporting like this? What is the use of these tables? Okay, very good point, pending. But what is the utility of that information? That anyways they are issuing this much refund applied, this much refund sanctioned. Why in my GSTR 9 where I am affixing my DSC? Correct, no? Then that is, sorry sir, please. That is my next point, okay. They rejected. I filed an application against that. I filed an appeal against that. Okay. I got a refund of I applied for a refund of 1 crore. They rejected the entire 1 crore refund. I went on appeal. The refund was granted to me. The order said that you are eligible for refund. Okay. I will have to again apply for refund. Should I include that in this table or not? If I include the same refund, I am adding twice. Correct, no? Am I able to convey my point? I am saying I exported goods on which I was eligible to claim refund of 1 crore. Some issue with the officer, he rejected completely. I went for appeal and I have reported 1 crore filed, 1 crore rejected. Right? Now, the appellate authority has given sanctioned the refund, saying the refund is eligible. I will go back to my GST portal and say refund against the order, not against export now. My category will change. Okay, and file a refund of 1 crore. It is sanctioned. Where should I report? Should I report or not? First of all, if I report, am I not giving duplicate numbers? Correct, that is one point. Next, if you look at the instructions, no, it says refunds filed in the financial year. Whether you have refund received, not received or pending, you are required to give refunds filed in the financial year. You have to start with what is the refund applications which you have filed. Okay, I will give that data. Now that means I will have to show that year's refund in 3 categories. Once I have shown it is filed, under these 3 categories only I will have to show whether it is pending, rejected or sanctioned, nothing else. Which means current year application, even if it is processed in the next year, I am required to report only as on 31st March what has happened. What is the use of that data also? Some of them said, no, if it is processed in the next year, you show it in the next year. I don't think that is how this form is built. They are saying, how much refund have you applied? 1 crore. You tell me as on 31st March, have you received? Was it under process or was it rejected? That means current period refund which I have applied, processed in the next year, I am not required to report that in the next year because the starting point is refunds filed in the current year. And if I use that approach, even then the data is of no use. What will department do or what will the taxpayer do with this data, which is incomplete data? Okay. Next, I filed a refund application on March, 25th of March I filed. I got a deficiency memo on 29th March. So the next refund application, same period, everything same. There was some deficiency, I did not upload one document. On 1st April 2023, I applied for the same category, same refund amount with the additional document which I had missed earlier. Right? Okay. Now should I report it twice or should I report it once? Because I filed. Correct. And every ARN is a new refund application according to department. My only point is, what is the use of this kind of data? They are asking data, we might want to when the table becomes mandatory, but there is no use of this data at all. There can be no logical conclusions which can be drawn based on this data. right? Okay. Next, we come to the last part of the presentation, right? Now, on export of goods or services, what if I am not able to receive the money in convertible foreign exchange? Okay, let's take this question for all of us. Assuming I have exported goods worth 1 crore. Okay. Now audit is going on. The audit officer says you have exported goods worth 1 crore. You give me shipping bill. You have given the shipping bill. Correct? Now he says, give me proof that you have received the money in convertible foreign exchange. You are not able to give. What can the department officer do? Sorry? Sorry? I'm not able to hear you guys. Charge tax on that. Why? Any reason? Because you have not received the money in convertible foreign exchange. Correct? No? Is it right? Yes? Export benefit has been given only because India is getting money in convertible foreign exchange. If you are not getting money in convertible foreign exchange, better you pay tax on that. Correct? No? Right? Okay. Let's look at the definition of export of goods and compare that with the definition of export of services. The definition of export of goods is when goods are sent out of India, that is export. When the goods are sent out of India to a place outside India, that is export of goods. Definition of services, service provider should be in India, service receiver should be outside India, they should not be mere establishments. Okay. Fourth is the place of supply should be outside India, and the most important, the money should have been received in convertible foreign exchange. For a service to qualify to be export of service, the condition is you should receive the money in convertible foreign exchange. But for goods to qualify to be export, officer's signature that yes, the goods have left India on this container which is behind the shipping bill is more than sufficient. There is no requirement under the GST law for you to receive the money in convertible foreign exchange as far as export of goods is concerned. So if the officer says, please prove you have received the money or not, the answer should not be I don't have proof. The answer should be I am not required to prove. In fact, there is a circular also in this. Okay. There is circular 125 para 48 which very clearly says that there is no requirement of receipt of money in convertible foreign exchange as far as export of goods is concerned. As far as export of services is concerned, the definition itself says if you don't receive the money in convertible foreign exchange, that transaction cannot be treated as export of services. Is this clear? Okay. You have exported services worth you don't receive money also, madam, no problem. Now that I have gone to this level and don't receive money also, INR is bonus only.
If I don't receive money, that means I don't have turnover. I can say like I don't have turnover.
Do you have a shipping bill where the officer has signed that goods have gone?
So if I don't receive money, suppose I have not.
No, do you have shipping bill?
Yes.
That's a proof of export. Sorry? So now yours is better. At least you have received money. My case, I did not receive money at all.
But still it is a turnover.
Still it is a turnover, still it is an export. It will become bad debts, that's all. But it is a turnover. Correct, no? Yes. I'll come to it. Services received in INR, too much of confusion, even I have. Right? I'll come to that. Right. Okay. Now, export of services. I exported $1 lakh worth of services. I did not receive the money in convertible foreign exchange. Officer says, proof. I am not able to prove. What happens? GST? Oh, all of us have got the notice also. Correct, we are fighting. Now, the point is, let's look at section 1 of the CGST Act. What does section 1 of the CGST Act says? Sir, we started reading from section 2. Definition. Section 1, only name of the act there, you know. This act extends to whole of India. Correct? Place of supply is outside India. How can GST apply is one question which can come up. Okay? if the place of supply as per the provisions of section 13 of the IGST Act itself says that the supply happens outside India and GST, it has been fed into our brain, destination based consumption tax, destination based consumption tax. In full act there is no destination based consumption tax, but that's what has been told to us. Where is the destination of this export? No tax. Correct, no? That should be one of the argument. But there is one income tax case, GVK, where it says even if there is a remote connection of a transaction in India, then the tax can be levied on the same, and that act cannot be held unconstitutional, saying that you are trying to do something which is outside the purview of the law, is what the judgment says. So there, now even the GST law will have to evolve, and we will have to put forth this argument saying where the place of supply itself is outside India, and section 1 says the entire act applies to the whole of India, not to a place outside India, how can you levy tax? That should be one argument. Second argument, okay, during COVID, I'll come to some points I've skipped, I'll come back to those on goods, okay. During COVID, this INR also is there. I'll cover the circular 197 and then go back to the other points which I have not covered. Okay. During COVID, a lot of people were not able to receive the money within 9 months time, which is being permitted by FEMA, and within 1 year time, which is being permitted by GST. Because in GST, if you see, you are ideally required to receive the money within 1 year from the date of issuance of export of service invoice. Okay. So you have not received that money. Okay. In that case, circular 197 was recently issued. It says, you exported services, you did not receive the money within 1 year's time, correct? Either because the audit officer insisted or because voluntarily wanted to comply with the GST law, you have paid GST on the same, okay? But the entire objective of export is that you should receive the money in convertible foreign exchange. Even if you have received that money after 2 years, you have received the money in convertible foreign exchange, the tax paid by you on the outward supply as GST, you will be entitled to claim refund of that. So let's take an example, and this one circular 197 is applicable only when you export services without payment of tax. So on 1st April 2023, I raised the invoice export without payment of tax. Till 31st March 2024, I did not receive the money. As a well-behaved citizen of India, who are found in a very small, numbers, on 16th of April, because it's circular within 15 days you have to pay, on 16th of April 2024, I paid the tax plus interest for 1 year and 15 days, because I claimed the export benefit on 1st April 2023. Okay, so I paid the tax along with interest on 16th of April 2024. But I was able to realize this money on 30th September 2024. The circular says the tax paid by you on the outward supply, because you did not receive the money in convertible foreign exchange, that money what you have paid, you are entitled to refund of the same. Interest I will not give you, tax I will give you back. Is this clear? That circular goes one step ahead and says, now that you have received the money in convertible foreign exchange, if you have any accumulated input tax credit, you would not claim refund, because when you claim refund, you have to show that realization is there. You have not claimed refund, you are now entitled to claim refund on that portion of the export realization now. We'll have to look at the time limits within which you have to apply, but that circular gives us two benefits. One, if it is, and so I'm sorry if I'm repeating, this is applicable only for export without payment of tax, export of services without payment of tax, where if you have paid, you will get back the tax back, and if you have not filed for a refund application, you would not have, and even if you have filed, the refund would not have been processed. For this money, if there is any unutilized input tax credit, you can claim refund also of the same. Is this clear? Okay. Now let's go back to our discussion on goods.
I have a query.
Yes, ma'am.
The proceeds are not received in case of services, it's not received at all.
Okay.
Then what is it?
One is you should talk about whether it is taxable at all or not. Correct, if the amount is huge and you want to litigate. One is whether that service can, I have not satisfied the criteria of export of service. Okay, no problem. But is it taxable in India? Am I required to pay tax on that? Correct, that could be the issue. In service tax, I have seen some of the officers have taken another argument. They said, okay, service means service which is performed in a taxable territory. Anything performed outside a taxable territory is not a service at all. So it is not export of service. You have not received the money in convertible foreign exchange. It is not a taxable supply at all. But if it is not a taxable supply, it is an exempt supply. You reverse the input tax credit. Is one or two notices I had seen in service tax era. But in GST, as of now, whatever I have seen, if you have not received the money, multiplied by 18%, please pay the tax on the same. I have not seen any notices where they say, please reverse the input tax rate. If they ask for reversal of input tax rate, I think they might have a stronger case. Okay, so that could be your argument. Sorry, I didn't get you.
So one client has exported services to a company in US.
Okay,
The company folded up because of COVID and
correct. So now the issue is whether you have to pay tax or not. This will be the argument you will have to take. If you don't take the argument, you will have to pay the tax. Then what else is the argument? Right? Because circular 197 will come into picture if there is a delayed receipt of export proceeds. You are saying there will not be. It is the classic case of bad debts only. Correct? So there you will not be able to take any benefit. Right? Okay. Sorry, I didn't get you. Right. So they have in their, as per their, but you have received that money plus the tax credit. You have received that money.
Whether we get a tax credit or not, still the GST is not attracting on the
You
balance.
will get the tax credit, no? Basically the point is this invoice is paid. You don't have a claim against that that company. So this invoice is paid.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll go back again to goods. Yes, sir. You raised invoice in?
April.
Okay, sir.
Didn't get money.
Okay.
So can I raise a credit note in March?
And you are not going to receive that money
Yes,
at all.
yes.
Any specific reason? If you
I'm not, instead of paying tax, but I'm not receiving credit satisfied. Reverse that, no, Vincent?
See, that's what a lot of us are actually doing. Our client will say, we will raise the invoice. As a chartered accountant, I am telling you what we are doing. Client will say, no, I forgot accounting this invoice. Now you please cancel it and give me another invoice of June. I don't want to account backdate invoice because my books of accounts are closed, TDS is closed, everything. Section 34 envisages situations based on which credit note can be given. One of the criteria is there is deficiency of service. Raising April invoice, cancelling invoice in April, raising it in June, what is the proof that there is deficiency of service? This issue is being picked up by the audit officers and there is no answer to that. It is only to accommodate the client interest we have done. Right? So that is as far as chartered accountants are, we are concerned. We are issuing credit note and then issuing invoices. If our firm gets audited, this will be an issue. Coming back to your question, sir. April you raise the invoice and it is a dollar billing because you are talking about export. If you have to issue a credit note, I believe the approval from RBI will be required, sir. I'm not, GST, okay, there is a deficiency of services, you exchange mails and he says, I'm not happy with the service or whatever. But as far as credit note and convertible foreign exchange is concerned, there is a specific limit up to which you can issue. Beyond that, there is a AD or a RBI approval required. I'm not too aware of those FEMA transactions, but definitely RBI or AD, authorized dealer will come into picture, sir. From GST angle, you will have to create some documentation or there will be some documentation which will be required that there was a deficiency of service or renegotiation in fee because of which credit note is being issued. But your case is actually bad debts. There is no solution for claiming deduction as far as bad debt is concerned, whether it is export invoice or whether it is a local invoice. So assuming I raised the invoice on the client, client is not going to pay me money because he is not in a position to pay. It's actually bad debts. What are we doing today? We are issuing credit note. But actually we cannot issue credit note. Credit note can be issued only when there is renegotiation in fee or when there is deficiency of service. That's all. So all of us are doing it, but it's a wrong practice. Okay. Move ahead. Okay. Again we go back to export of goods. There is one rule which has been introduced, rule 96B. 96B says, if you have exported the goods, okay, and based on those exports, you have claimed refund. So assuming you exported 1 crore worth of goods, okay, and based on that you had accumulated input tax credit of 10 lakh rupees, you have claimed refund of the 10 lakh rupees. but subsequently out of that 1 crore you are not able to realize 25% money, then the refund proportionate to the 25% you will have to pay to the department along with interest. So now I will repeat again, on export of goods there is no condition for receipt of money in convertible foreign exchange, but on that export if you have claimed refund and if you are not able to receive the money, then the percentage of refund which was given to you originally, that will have to be paid back to the government along with interest. Okay. Then there is another provision which says if you get back the money within 3 months time, then again you can get that refund of that refund. The amount which has been recovered from you, you can claim refund of that without the interest. That is also there. But the point I am trying to repeatedly mention here is export of goods, foreign currency realization is not a condition at all. You claim refund to the extent of proportionate unrealized value, the refund will have to be given back. But the entire value of export cannot be subjected to tax, because on 1 crore if you are not realizing 25 lakhs, on 25 lakhs 18% is much higher versus 2.5 lakhs out of your 10 lakhs refund. So what can be demanded for is this 2.5 lakhs refund and not the tax on 25 lakh rupees. Clear? Okay. Then export of services, somebody asked, is payment in INR permitted? So if you look at the export of service definition also, it says receipt of money in convertible foreign exchange except cases where RBI has permitted receipt of money in INR. In foreign trade policy, if you look at chapter 2, I think, it allows for India to transact with, I think, Israel in INR. So maybe when you are exporting services to Israel, I am not well versed with this FEMA laws and all, but in FT, foreign trade policy, if you observe, it says you can transact with Israel in INR. So now my reading of that based on export of services, because RBI is permitting receipt of money in INR, if I transact with Israel in INR, it will still be treated as export because RBI allows me to receive the money in INR. Okay. Next, RBI had last year issued a circular saying, because they wanted to promote rupee, they said if you receive the money from a special Vostro account through a correspondent bank, I missed the entire subject here itself. Okay, what is all this? No idea. Okay, if you receive the money from a Vostro account of a correspondent bank, even if the money is received in INR, it will be treated as export of services. What is Vostro? What is Nostro? What is correspondent bank? I am also trying to find somebody who can help me in FEMA. Right? But when you say correspondent bank, it means if there is a bank here which also has a branch outside India and somebody opens a special Vostro account, special Masala Dosa, specifically that account only has to be opened. From that account, if the amount is transferred here, even if you receive the money in INR, the officer cannot insist on a EBRC or a foreign inward remittance certificate. Clear? Okay. Last question which I have, I am making supply, I am undertaking supply of goods or services to SEZ. Goods anyway is out of question. I am making supplies to SEZ. Am I required to receive the money in convertible foreign exchange, or I can get it in INR also? INR also? Sure. But it is export, no. It is deemed to be export. So even money received also is deemed to be received in foreign currency. Right? No. If you look at export of services have been defined, supplies to SEZ have not been defined. Zero rated supplies says export outside India or supplies to SEZ will be zero rated supplies. They have not said zero rated supplies you should receive the money in convertible foreign exchange. Only export has a condition of receipt of money in convertible foreign exchange. SEZ does not have that condition at all. So even if you receive the money in INR, as far as SEZ is concerned, it will be treated as a zero rated supply only. After the amendment on 1st October 2023, we have to be careful whether that is part of the authorized operation of the SEZ or not. If it is not forming part of the authorized operation of the SEZ, then we will have problems. But as long as it is forming part of the authorized operations of the SEZ. Now, how do we understand whether what I am doing, chartered accountancy services I am giving to them, whether it is for their authorized operations or not? Correct? Very simple. Goods will have to be admitted, meaning the officer will have to sign that yes, these goods have been admitted into SEZ. That means it is for authorized operation only, because the officer now has to check whether the goods are for authorized operation or not. As far as services are concerned, 66 list of services were given originally, then one service was added. These are reference to the service tax list of services, where they say any SEZ will require these kind of services. Okay, these are deemed to be used for authorized operation. If a SEZ is consuming any other services outside these 67 services, they will have to go to UAC, Unit Approval Committee. Okay, tell them that look, apart from these 67 services which are by default approved for me, I am consuming this additional service which is not part of this list. Please include this in my default list. Then it will be included in my default list, and I can give that to my vendor. Based on that, the vendor can continue supplying those services to me without payment of tax. And that's made effective from 1st October 2023. Clear? Okay. This is all I have. I've just created one small WhatsApp community where you can connect and you can ask any queries related to GST. I will rest assured all the queries will be answered. So you can just, if you are okay, you can just join the community. Yeah, foreign exchange fluctuation. Yes, sir. Sorry, please. Okay, sorry. So, assuming I am exporting goods at $1 lakh, okay, and the transaction value, the exchange rate on that day is 80 rupees. Okay, so what I will do for the purpose of GST, whatever is the generally accepted principle for accounting, based on that I will account the transactions. Okay, so it will be 1 lakh multiplied by 80 rupees. 80 lakh rupees is the revenue for the purpose of GST. In my financials, I would have reported 80 lakhs only, but exchange gain or loss will also be an income. If it is a gain, I will show it as an income. If it is a loss, I will show it as a negative amount in the income, or I will show it on the expenditure side. So now if it is positive, that is in our case 80 became 82. It will become 82 lakhs revenue in my books, but in my GST returns the turnover is still 80 lakhs. 9C has a specific table, specific line item where we can report exchange, the difference between turnover as per financials versus the turnover as per GST because of exchange fluctuation. So you will have to report that amount in that table. That's all. Okay. Any other questions? I'll be more than happy. Like I said, 197 is applicable only for export without payment of tax. Okay. Now, yeah, another question which comes up, sir, we forgot to take LUT. Oh, that was a bigger issue. Okay, the kind of response, that was a bigger issue. We forgot to take LUT. Now the officer is asking for payment of tax. What to do? They have relaxed the condition of receipt of money in convertible foreign exchange. LUT is only, I go online, I require LUT, they will give a number. That's all. In excise also there was a requirement of getting LUT. Okay. There are a lot of judgments which say LUT is merely procedural as long as you have satisfied all the conditions. What are the conditions? Export should be outside India, shipping bill should be there. As long as you have satisfied all the conditions, even if there is no LUT, you are not required to pay taxes on those exports. Same logic I think will apply in GST also. It's only a procedural requirement. I have not satisfied that procedural requirement. For that I cannot be penalized by asking me to pay tax. What does LUT say? LUT says you should have exported services. You should have received the money within 1 year's time. You promise that you will abide by all the laws of GST. And if you don't abide, whatever penalty is there, you will pay. That is what LUT is now. We would not, first when I prepared LUT, I had read, because we had to type it online, it was not there. Correct? After that, none of us have read LUT. It's like terms and conditions in any website. Yes, accept, submit. Correct? No? That is what is there in the LUT. I have satisfied all the conditions. Just that I did not apply for LUT. That cannot be the basis for creating a demand on an export transaction. Clear? Okay. So there will be some case laws which will have to come. In excise there are already. You can use those and represent before the department. Right? They had in between exempted Said you don't have to, if you receive the money in INR, it will be exempt. That entry now has been removed from 12 of 2017. That means from there also you have to receive the money in convertible foreign exchange only. Goods. Earlier it was under exempt. They removed that entry. So now you have to receive the money in convertible foreign exchange only. No, sorry. Services, this was there. If you are asking about goods, there is no requirement of receipt of money at all now. No money received. No problem. It will be treated as export. Right? Anything else? No? Okay, sure. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Thanks a lot to Bangalore branch again for providing me this opportunity to appear, to come before you and present my views. Thanks a lot.
With a fantastic sense of humor, which you always show up in your classes for students and session for members, you could make the members on their feel on their toes for 1.5 hours. A round of applause for that fantastic session by C. Anish sir. Members, with that note, your knowledge kitty has got refreshed and updated. On behalf of members present here and all the managing committee members of Bangalore branch, we would like to thank you, sir, for your valuable time for all of us. We would like to hand over a memento to speaker as a token of gratitude and respect. Can I request VM Tuppad, Sikasa chairman, to come out to desk and then do the honors. Thank you, sir. Before breaking for lunch, a couple of announcements. Bangalore branch has trained almost 90 BCom students of government RC college with 70 hours in tally, income tax, GST, MS Excel, Word, TDS, etc. and 30 hours on soft skills, and all students are ready to be absorbed as paid assistants in your firms. And the campus placement drive is on Monday, the 20th November 2023 at RC College. Details are available on Bangalore branch website. Kindly take note of it. And the second one is Bangalore branch is conducting 2 certification courses, one on DISA and second one on internal audit, and both are on first come first serve basis. Details again are available on website. Kindly register and let your friends also know. Let us break for lunch. Let us sharply assemble at 2 p.m. Thank you.